Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, it's my great pleasure to wish everybody Happy New Year, and thank you. And I also want to firstly congratulate the new whips in the National Party and the Government Party, and the promotion, of course, of Louise Upston, and I'm looking forward to working with you all. Also want to congratulate the incoming ministers and commiserate with those who've been told don't come Monday. There's only one word to describe the Prime Minister's statement today, Madam Speaker, and that word is, yes, I'll get there, disappointment. Disappointment. It was such a disappointing statement. Not that I have high expectations of this Prime Minister or this government, but Kiwis are increasingly disappointed, and what we heard today was more of the same. Especially disappointed will be those forgotten New Zealanders who are working harder than ever, doing their fair share and playing their part, but struggling to get ahead. They're feeling let down, and who can blame them? The government's turned their backs on them. They've turned their backs on those thrown on the jobless scrap heap in the last 4 years or last 5 years. They've turned their backs on those struggling to find a job, except to blame them for being jobless in the first place. And let's be clear, people want to work. They want to work, and this idea that they don't and they're a bunch of skivers is just disgraceful. After 5 years of a John Key national government, there's a lot to be disappointed about, Madam Speaker. And the government's even taken in the last few days to mocking businesses in our manufacturing sector because they've had the gall to come forward in public to tell the truth about the manufacturing crisis in this country and the crisis that exists in what is a very important sector that helps create good jobs and good quality jobs. So we need a hands-on government, a government that's going to do something. But the biggest disappointment for me, Madam Speaker, in the speech today, and I'm sure for many others, was the lack of mention of jobs. Not a word about jobs, not a heading, not a single thing about employment. We heard lots of excuses and we heard an awful lot of blame. But the only job creation program in the speech, in John Key's speech today, was to increase prison labour, creating workplaces in prisons where there are no rights, no difficult workers, of course, who insist that they should be safe at work and healthy. No workers actually wanting to negotiate over paying conditions because, of course, prisoners don't have rights. Don't get me wrong, Madam Speaker, Labor supports prisoners having the right to work. But this is not a job creation program, and coming across on top of the government's other job creation program of building a prison in Wiri, it really does you do have to ask, is this the grand economic plan that we can expect from this government? The good news, I suppose, for the prisoners that are going to be working in prisons is they will have a 40-hour week, according to John Key. So in that sense, they're going to have something that no other New Zealanders have anymore. 40-hour week disappeared, it's gone. Disappeared a long time ago. The 8-hour day is long forgotten. And New Zealanders, as we all know, and we say often, are working longer and harder than ever. We have an issue of long working hours. We have an issue of underemployment as well, but we also work some of the longest hours in the OECD. These forgotten New Zealanders are trying to do their bit, trying to do the right thing by their families, and the best the government has come up with today is jobs in prisons. There's a sinister little paragraph in the speech, and I had to look quite hard to find it. But on page 7, John Key says in his statement that the government will this year introduce legislation to boost labour market flexibility, including improvements to collective bargaining rules and extended flexible working arrangements. It will also progress legislation to introduce a new starting out wage to prevent young people being shut out of the labour markets. Now let's translate what that means. Translated, this little paragraph means that they intend to go ahead with pay cuts for young workers. What it means is the government plans to cut the pay for all New Zealand workers by making it impossible for collective bargaining. And I've been hearing some whispers of the nasty little plans that they've got up their sleeve when they introduce that legislation. What it means is our most vulnerable workers will lose their protection when their jobs are sold off to other employers. What it means is that the government persists in its belief that reducing workplace rights substitutes for an economic plan. In the next couple of weeks, the government will decide on the pay of our lowest income workers in its annual review of the minimum wage. Now, the minimum wage isn't the only tool to building quality jobs and decent pay, but it's become increasingly important as more and more workers are reliant on it. And it's a tool that a hands-on government will use and should use proactively, because it affects so many low-income families. Yes, that's what I'm getting. That's right. And we've repeatedly called for a $15 minimum wage. And this government had a chance to do something about it last year with David Clark's $15 minimum wage bill, but of course they said no. Since John Key took office, Mr Speaker, the value of the minimum wage in real terms has declined. So those who depend on it are worse off. These are the lowest paid people in New Zealand who are trying to feed their families on $13.50 an hour, and in fact less, given its real terms. A decent minimum wage, let alone a living wage, is not in the lexicon of this government. It wasn't mentioned along with jobs in the speech. It's abandoned its promise to catch up with Australia, along with a whole raft of other broken promises. I mean, that just seems like such a joke. We never hear the Prime Minister talking about catching up with Australia. And in fact, he's changed his language too with that. The brain drain has now become the brain exchange. So that's now the excuse. It's all right that thousands of people are going to Australia for better wages and better jobs, because we're getting brains back from all around the world. Yes, so, you know, that's the new language. That's the new excuse that we're having from this government and from the Prime Minister. Now, the incoming Minister of Labour, Simon Bridges, could be extremely brave and make a significant mark as a new minister by showing his sympathy to low-income workers and their families by lifting the minimum wage to $15 an hour. He could do that. He could show that he has influence in the cabinet when he sits around that cabinet table, not that he's just a green minister that knows nothing, cares nothing. He could do that, and his influence as a new minister will be tested by the decision he makes in the next 2 or 3 weeks around the minimum wage for 2013. I hope that he's brave enough to take the minimum wage to $15 an hour. Because if he does, it will help address the issue not only of New Zealand's low pay, its disgraceful level of low pay, but widening inequality and poverty. We need a decent minimum wage, Mr Speaker, to provide a safety net for vulnerable workers, but to improve the lot of many people, including Māori and Pacific workers. Unfortunately, and it's not Simon Bridges' fault, but the acting minister's made a bad start to this whole minimum wage process by slashing the comprehensive review and limiting the submissions to just 2 organisations this year. And they gave those organisations just 6 days to get their submissions in. That was the CTU and Business New Zealand, who are representative organisations. The CTU, I know, has 32 affiliates that it needs to consult with. They were given 6 days to make a submission on the minimum wage. That just shows an arrogant approach. And I know both those organisations take this process very seriously, and they would have required much more time than that. There are some big challenges for the new minister in this portfolio, not least the challenge of stopping the carnage in our workplaces. There's been a lot of talk about health and safety. There's a health and safety task force, and I do credit the former minister with setting that up. But people are dying every week. There's an urgent job for him to do. I'm happy to help the minister with that very, very urgent job. The former minister was prepared to work collaboratively with Labour on that. It is an issue for 2013 that must be addressed. Labour wants to see quality jobs, well-paid jobs, safe jobs, not the increasing drive that we're seeing towards precarious work, towards mat jobs, towards driving our sons and daughters overseas to other parts of the world where they can be so much better off.
Melissa Lee. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to start my contribution